Our content is presented by BetOnline, which is your number one source for the NBA Finals and Stanley Cup playoffs this season. Every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. When the game is over, head on over to our online casino, get in on a game of blackjack or poker, unwind with one of our over 150 slot games. Head to the website today to get in on all the action. Use promo code BELIEVE. That is BLEAV for your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Bet online. The game starts here.
And today we're going to look at rank our top 5 offensive units in the SEC this year. So we'll start at 5. We'll count down 1 being who we think will be the best offensive unit. But we'll, again, start at 5, work our way down. Chris, I'll let you go first. Who do you have at number 5 as we rank our top 5 offensive units?
All right, at number 5, I've got the Missouri Tigers because, boy, do they bring back a lot of guys. They bring back Brady Cook, who just did such a fantastic job last year. They bring back just a very experienced receiving room. Luther Burden, they got depth, and Theo Weiss. Mookie Cooper's been there forever. Brett Norfleet, their tight end, kind of gets lost in the shuffle. Don't know about the offensive line as much. They lost Javon Foster, but they returned 3 starters. Don't know about running back either, but nobody was talking about Cody Schrader coming in the last year, and he was the most productive running back in the league. You have guys that have made plays before. You've got a coach who runs a system who has made the most out of it, at least he did last year. I like Missouri's chances to be in that top 5.
Yeah, that's I like that. I mean, having them in the top 5, I think they really have a chance, especially with an offensive minded coach, to do that. Number 5, I've got one of the newcomers. I've got the Oklahoma Sooners. They're breaking in a quarterback in Jackson Arnold. But they've got so many guys around him. They've, whether it's transfers, Deion Burks, who's come in, who is fantastic. You think of guys like Andrew Anthony, Nick Anderson, Jalen Gibson. Those are guys who last year were averaging more than 20 yards per catch. And if you have, 4 or 5 guys who can do that, and your quarterback's able to get it to him, which I think Jackson Arnold is, just based off what I've seen from him in the spring. I think they're going to put up some big numbers. Now, how are they going to fit in the SEC? We'll have to see. I think it's going to be a good season for Oklahoma. But once Jackson Arnold really settles into his role, which I don't think is going to take long, then watch out, I think, for Oklahoma's offense. I think it could be really good. So I've got them at number 5, just because I think they're really good, but I also think there's also some questions just with the young Jackson Arnold. But I've got them at number 5. Who is your number 4 offensive unit in the SEC?
Number 4, I got Alabama, and we kind of hashed out Alabama's potential issues earlier in the show, but Alabama's got Jalen Milroe, who just got better and better and is going to be one of those guys on that short list for potential Heisman finalists. You got Kalen DeBoer, who just is a tremendous offensive coach. You saw what he did with Washington last year. Again, we don't know what all the parts are going to look like. They did get Caden Proctor back in the spring after they lost from Alabama. Hey, you bet on Alabama, and I'm going to say the Crimson Tide, even if we don't know exactly what it looks like, are going to be in that top 5.
Yeah, and we think the same there on number 4. I've also got Alabama, and when you go out, Nick Saban was such a defensive minded coach. He's a brilliant defensive coach. He spent a lot of time with the defensive backs. Alabama goes out after Nick Saban and hires one of the best offensive minds in the country. And the 2 other ones are in the SEC. But Kalen DeBoer, what he was able to do with this offense at Washington, Michael Penix, and we saw the numbers he put up. I think he has such a great offensive mind, and he translates so well to the players. Michael Penix has been in Tuscaloosa recently. I'm sure he's had a lot of great conversations with Jalen Milroe and helping him as well. And so I think this Alabama offense, and it may take a couple of games to get settled in, but I think it's I think we're going to see the Alabama offense just continue with how we've seen it go, and maybe even get better under a coach like Kalen DeBoer. So yeah, I mean, we both got the Tide there at number 4. Who is your number 3 team, Chris?
Well, I've got Ole Miss. Feels like a Lane Kiffin offense has got to be in here in your top 5 just because it's Lane Kiffin. Oh, by the way, 2 of the top 3 or 4 receivers in the league. They got a third-year quarterback who's been very productive. Now, they lost Quinshawn Judkins. That hurts, but they've got 3 running backs at least who can play. Maybe not the top offensive line in the league, but a good enough one. I mean, the quarterback, the receiver room, and the presence of Lane Kiffin should be good enough alone to get Ole Miss in the top 5 in history. I think backs me up here.
Yeah, I think I'll get to them in a minute, but I've got Georgia number 3, and
Okay.
and I went back and forth in this because I think Carson Beck is a great quarterback. He's just got so many new guys around him. Like, I don't think there's a doubt that they're going to be on the same page and they're going to put up great numbers and win a lot of games this year. But just you lose guys like Ladd McConkey, you lose a guy like Brock Bowers, who is a big target. Now you got a great running back now in Trevor Etienne, but who's going to step up around Carson Beck? Who's going to be his targets to throw to? Again, they brought in some good wide receivers out of the portal, and some guys who were on the roster last year who have stayed and have gotten better. I know, but I've got them at number 3 just because of the questions. Like, Carson Beck is going to be able to get the ball up in the air, and he's going to be confident in throws. But are they going to have guys who can make plays and catch them? That's why I've got them at number 3. But again, I think they're going to be a pretty good offense there. So, who is your number 2 team, Chris?
I've got Texas, and he's got all the ingredients. He's got an offensive-minded head coach who's had success in Steve Sarkisian. Of course, went to the playoff last year. Lindy's position rankings in the SEC. Number 1 quarterback room. Of course, we know about that Quinn Ewers and all the talent behind him. Number 2 running back room. Number 2 wide receiver room. Pulling Isaiah Bond from Alabama. And number 1 offensive line. Any questions here? Maybe the question is, Chris, should you have had him at your number 1 spot?
Yeah, I've actually got Texas at number 2 as well. And you said a lot of what I was going to say. To me, there's no better offensive coach in the country than Steve Sarkisian. And just talking with people who were close to the Alabama program when he was there, just the way he approached game planning for every game. The changes that he made in the game and how quick he was able to make offensive changes and change the scheme and be successful is incredible. He's a very gifted offensive coach, and he's got the pieces around him to have another great year. Quinn Ewers, incredible quarterback. If something happens, well, hey, you got Arch Manning right behind him. I mean, 2 fantastic quarterbacks. Isaiah Bond transferred in to help the wide receiver room. You got running backs, CJ Baxter, who's fantastic running. I think this is going to be an incredible offense for Texas. I think this is a Texas team who might could go all the way because of the weapons they have on offense. So I've got them at number 2, but I agree with you. Yeah, the only question is, like, could you put them at number 1? And I think you definitely could. Who's your number 1?
Well, I've got Georgia, and maybe that's overstating it, but Georgia right now has got the quarterback who is the top favorite to win the Heisman. Certainly was great a year ago, and sometimes it's not who you don't have. You mentioned, and I think the Brock Bowers loss. I mean, he may be the best tight end in the history of SEC football, and they did without him last year and still won everything but one game. Sometimes it's who you like. Let's look at their wide receiver room just the last few years. They get Ra Thomas from Mississippi State, Dominic Lovett from Missouri, guys that were probably the top receiver on those teams at decent programs. They were afterthoughts at Georgia the last couple of years. They landed a guy in London Humphreys that I don't know how much the SEC community at large knows him, but he was a really good player at Vanderbilt. Probably a top 3 or 4 kid on their team. He went to Georgia in spring. I don't know. He's going to crack their top 3. You look at the offensive line, Tate Rutledge, Xavier Truss, guys like that feel like they played forever. look, Georgia always figures it out. They've got depth coming out their ears. I'm going to ride with Georgia. Maybe it's recency bias. Maybe I should have been more creative, but that's where I went.
Okay, and I think that's a good choice. I've got the Ole Miss Rebels at number 1, based off Lane Kiffin for the first time has a third-year starting quarterback in Jackson Dart, and I mentioned how great of an offensive mind Steve Sarkisian is. I think Lane Kiffin is probably the second greatest offensive mind in the country. And so for him to have a third-year starting quarterback, hit the portal hard, brought in some really good guys. He's got a great receiver room for Dart to go to. You mentioned he lost Quinshon Junkins, but he's got other great running backs in as well, and guys who can also catch some passes out of the backfield as well. So I think Lane Kiffin is just so creative on offense. With another year with Jackson Dart, I think he's going to be even more creative in the way they work some things. So I think this could be one of the most exciting, probably the most exciting and explosive offense in the SEC this year, with the creativity of the mind of Lane Kiffin. So I'm excited to see what Ole Miss can do. And if they look the way I think they will offensively, they're going to be playing well into January, I think, for the Rebels.
Chase, let's ponder what we left out for a minute, okay?
Okay.
I didn't have Oklahoma on there. That might be a mistake. Neither of us had Tennessee on there.
Yeah,
that's one that you're like, oh boy, do I really put this list together and don't put Josh Heupel and those guys on there? But that's the kind of league we're covering this year.
Yeah, it is. And that was funny you say that, because I was really going back and forth on Tennessee of whether I wanted to put them in that 5 spot or Oklahoma, how I want to do. But I feel like, and I put Oklahoma in there with a freshman, first year starting quarterback.
Yeah.
Nico, though, at Tennessee, I think is going to be a great quarterback. I still want to wait and see. I think they would be 6 if we kept going. I think they would be number 6. Tennessee would be number 6 on my list, because I got to see how the Tennessee offense rolls. Heupel's a great offensive coach as well. He understands that quarterback position because he was a quarterback. I have to wait and see. I feel like if this Tennessee offense is going to be like the 2022 Tennessee offense, or if it's going to be kind of the offense that took a step back last year. I've just got to wait and see before I put everything in on Tennessee. But they were so hard to leave out of this list. I can see what you're saying there.
And I think what you're saying between the lines, it depends on quarterback play. And let's look 2 years ago what they turned Hendon Hooker into. And I just think Joe Milton, it just was, you can only do so much with a quarterback, and it probably just wasn't going to happen with him. I feel like Nico is closer to Hendon Hooker than he is Joe Milton. And if so, I probably am the one that made a mistake leaving him out. But I mean, goodness gracious, Oklahoma. I mean, there's some other offenses we're not even mentioning. We talked about how Florida's got some players. Kentucky's got a really good receiving room. Flipped it over at quarterback with a former 5-star guy. LSU, my goodness, Garrett Nussmeier.
Yeah,
really talented kid. Jeff Levy, great offensive mind. Now, Mississippi State is not going to crack the top 5 this year, but he's an offensive mind that could be in anybody's program somewhere. I mean, you got a lot of choices on this list.
Yeah, and I think what could be cool, and I can make note of this, is to go back, in December and look at this list compared to who actually finished top 5 in the SEC in offense, because I think our list could be much different in December, because you mentioned a team like LSU or Tennessee. You had Missouri in your top 5. I didn't in mine, but they could be one of those teams. I think LSU could be a borderline as well to be in this top 5 for sure. I mean, I think Garrett Nussmeier is going to step in to do a great job after what Jaden Daniels did. So, there's so many great offenses in the SEC. It was hard to narrow it down to 5.
Yeah, it really was.
All right, so that's our top 5 offensive units in the SEC.